Wow, that's quite an act to follow. How inspiring is that? That's amazing. A little bit of me wanted the previous speech to be very bad, so I had somewhere to go, but sadly that wasn't the case, so amazing. Anyway, my name's Guy White. I'm the managing director of a company called Catalyx. Catalyx specializes in uncovering insight and innovation from crowds, communities, and online conversation. And today, you guys have heard an awful lot about what we would term as active crowdsourcing. What I'm going to talk to you now is about how passive crowdsourcing should become increasingly important in the overall ecosystem of crowdsourcing. And I want to start by giving you 4 examples of when passive crowdsourcing has brought value to very, very different examples. The first one, more UK males talk about hairstyling online than females. Why is that important? Well, this was a piece of work that we did for an FMCG company, a hairstyling company, who were working with us to understand how to create better digital strategy and online content. Now, what happened here was by analyzing and understanding the online conversations, we actually found that online guys are just a little bit more likely in the UK to talk about hairstyling than females. They thought this was wrong. They thought our data was wrong. They couldn't believe it. But what we found was if you're a female, you go to the bar or the coffee shop, you might be going out for a date on the weekend. You say, what should I do with my hair? If you're a guy in the UK and you go to the pub with your mates and you said, I'm going on a date this weekend, what should I do with my hair? Yeah, they're going to look at you strange, but they've still got the same insecurities. Suddenly they go online. So this was very, very interesting. Second one, very, very different. January 2013, a helicopter crashed into a crane in London. Now, fine, these things happen. What was interesting about this particular very newsworthy event was that for about 3 hours, the traditional media agencies exclusively used the hundreds or so people that were posting on Twitter to get the news and to feed the story through. What was even more interesting was the Metro, the London Evening Standard, which is a free newspaper in London, used this picture as their front page. It was probably, and Maria, I'm sure will correct me here, but it was the first time it became really mainstream that Twitter, 1, beat and broke the news, but 2, was used for such a long time exclusively before more wider sources were used in this point. Again, very different. New York Planning Authority. New York Planning Authority uses geotagged tweets to understand the behavior of its population throughout the week. Why is this so interesting? Well, have a look. They created these 4 maps: business, weekend leisure, nightlife, and residential. This is really interesting for business and residential development. This is really interesting for more effective policing. And going forward, this is really interesting because this can be updated live in real time. So this data isn't something that they need to look and understand and survey and so on. They can see the evolution, the movements live. 4th example. The financial industry's problems with recruiting women is a result of choices made by those women aged 16 to 18. Now, there's a myth, really, that the financial industry, especially in the UK I'm talking, so maybe it's different here, but is a male-dominated industry. There's thoughts that the financial industry sort of appeals more to the male psyche than the female psyche, and for financial institutions, this is difficult because they don't want to have the 80-20 split male-female ratio of their workforce. What we did here was we worked with a leading financial institution to understand what on earth was going on. What we discovered was that actually when you look at the conversations online, the common sort of misconception that was that actually females were very, very interested in the financial industry. But traditionally, recruitment in the financial industry at a graduate level is chemistry, mathematics, applied sciences, physics, and so on, which are male-dominated subjects through choices that women have made at the age of 16 to 18 when they're looking to get into further education. And therein lies the problem, which changes completely the mindset of the recruitment strategy for these organizations. So 4 very different examples. What binds them all together? Well, what binds them all together is that what I would call passive crowdsourcing. Now, if active crowdsourcing is about engaging with a crowd to create better value, which I think is by and large the CSW's definition of crowdsourcing, passive crowdsourcing flips that on its head and says it's about creating value from crowds that don't come to you. And that's really very interesting, I think. Now, I'd say it's more of a mindset than a business model. In fact, you could argue if you were in marketing and PR, you would probably call this maybe social listening. If you worked in government and you were interested in open innovation, you would call this open governance. If you worked in journalism, well, these days you would probably just call it research, frankly. But actually, when you think about active crowdsourcing works in so many different areas, as we've heard today. And passive crowdsourcing is exactly the same thing. One thing is true of passive crowdsourcing. First of all, I would say, if you have the right technical tools to be able to reach the crowd, let's say, if you have the right business question that you're trying to answer, and you have the right analyst that can really get the understanding from the data, its speed is unbelievable versus a traditional approach. The second thing is, a traditional approach takes a sample of people. A traditional approach asks them questions. That sample, if you're a focus group, may be 6 people. And there are lots of problems with that type of approach. First of all, if you're in a focus group, you have 6 people in that focus group. I don't know if anyone has either watched or been in focus groups. Quite often you get a personality in that room. That personality skews the entire process because you have one person's opinion and 5 people listen to that opinion, 3 people stay quiet, and 2 people toe the line. It's not very helpful to get both perspectives. By listening, instead of being able to approach people, you suddenly are able to get both perspectives, and you're able to therefore understand really, really what's going on. And the third thing I'd say that's so interesting is you remove all bias. I think there's sort of an old cliche that says you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and this is really, really true, I think, when it comes to crowdsourcing as well. When you're in a focus group, when you're doing any type of research at all, when you're looking to reach the crowd, when you're looking to moderate the crowd, there will always be some form of bias because you're asking a question, because you have that guy with the attitude in the room. Suddenly, that's gone because you're just listening. You're just tapping in to what the passive crowd is saying, which is incredibly powerful. And when you combine all these 3 together, you suddenly have a new way or a new mindset of approaching and understanding what's going on out there that wasn't possible before. So uses. Well, I've probably missed out an awful lot here. I mean, we focus on customer engagement, on influencer tracking, on innovation. I think there are many, many, many areas of business where this suddenly becomes very interesting. I want to give you just 2 examples of that. One very serious and one much more lighthearted. So Maria talked an awful lot of the work that they've been doing in the Philippines, which frankly is unbelievable and fantastic and shows the power of crowdsourcing. Passive crowdsourcing was used extensively in the hunt for the Boston bombers. So these are images from following the Boston bombing, which I think was one of the biggest news stories that happened last year. Now, the interesting thing about the Boston bombing, first of all, I think it's fair to say that the Boston Police Department did an unbelievable and exemplary job of being able to track down and catch the perpetrators in a very, very fast speed. But did you know that they actively encouraged and actively reached out to conspiracy theorists and amateur journalists that were working on Reddit, who were actively out there discussing with themselves, posting up ideas, putting up photos to follow leads and to understand what was going on? Did you know that they took hundreds and hundreds of images from various social media channels, particularly Twitter, of people that were involved in the crisis and were taking pictures and posting them up? And I want to share with you this big picture, because this big picture is eerie and amazing at the same time. This is I don't know how many people have heard about this, but this picture is taken by just someone in the street that happened to be there. This picture was then ended up on Reddit and ended up in one of these forums where people were discussing about them. What's interesting is this guy here with the white cap on the left, that's one of the suspects. That's one of the bombers. And this is one of the pictures that dramatically increased the speed that the police force were able to work towards bringing the perpetrators to justice. I find that incredible, frankly, and the power of being able to tap into that passive crowd. Much more lighthearted. This is an old example, but I really love it. This is something that Kraft Cheese did a few years back now. Kraft Cheese wanted to work out a way of engaging people on social media. And the idea they came up with this. Very simply, what happens is when two people at the same time, anywhere in the world, talk about mac and cheese, they created the Mac and Jinx campaign. So they listened into their conversations, and if they said mac and cheese at exactly the same time, Kraft jumped in there and they said, hey, Jinx, mac and cheese. What's the chances of two people from other corners of the world saying this at the same time? Just because we love you guys, have a freeloader product. Which then brings in some really interesting thoughts about turning passive crowdsourcing into active crowdsourcing and creating the community around it. Now, I think, let's say 90% of today has been talked about online, about using the power of the internet to bring people together. Crowdsourcing isn't a new term. Crowdsourcing isn't a new theory. I mean, anyone that's read The Wisdom of the Crowds will appreciate all the examples that are in that book about stuff that's happened from hundreds of years. Passive crowdsourcing is exactly the same. Although the internet is a massive enabler, it's not necessarily the only tool that needs to be used. I have a friend that runs a word-of-mouth agency based out of Geneva in Switzerland. And she occasionally spends her time sitting in cafes and just listening. And it's essentially exactly the same concept. Now, what's really interesting is she uses the concept that 90% of branded conversations are not had online. So if she's sat in that cafe, she can work out exactly what's trending at any one moment in that particular area that she happens to be in. Pass me the Heinz, were you using a Dyson Hoover? I'd like to see your Apple phone, blah, 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 blah. Just how people talk in normal life. And suddenly you can understand what a particular crowd of individuals is talking about at any one point without actually having to engage them. An example from 1996. Haier, a Chinese manufacturer of washing machines, discovered that they had a problem. They were getting a lot of product complaints about washing machines that were clogging. So they started to look into it. When they started to analyze the complaints that were coming through their customer services teams, they actually uncovered that those complaints, very strange, people were using the washing machines to wash sweet potatoes. So they listened to all these complaints that came in, and they modified both the machine and the communication around the machine. And they brought out a new model. They made 10,000 products, and they sold out almost instantaneously, which shows the power of listening into your consumer, not necessarily enabled by the internet, by social listening, and so on. Now, I think the next two slides, that no presentation about this topic would be complete without saying a few words on the negative side. This isn't necessarily the great white hope. I think social listening has been tarnished itself by going to companies and suggesting that it is the next big great white hope. The first thing I want to talk about is data coverage. Because you're not actively engaging with a crowd, you're at the reliance of being able to extract the data. Companies such as Twitter know the value of the data that they have. Getting access to Twitter's fire hose, to Facebook's historical data, to other elements of slightly more obscure data can be very, very difficult. And getting reliable data can also be very, very difficult. So I think in order to be able to run passive crowdsourcing effectively, it's very important to make sure that you know and have a team in place that understands this. Related to that, let's think about China. We're currently working on a project in China. China isn't the most open of countries, I think, would be an understatement. So trying to extract that data can be incredibly difficult. Why is that important? Well, that's important because if you can't extract the data, then you're going to get skewed results from the data that you can extract. The second thing I'd like to talk about is who is talking. What makes the internet so great is that you can be whoever you want to be. That's great, but it's a double-edged sword. Why do guys talk more than girls in the UK about hairstyling? Because they can talk about hairstyling without any of their friends knowing that it's them wondering if they should color their hair blonde. However, there's a dark side to this as well. Anyone can be anyone, and of course, there's all the issues surrounding that. From a market research point of view, the amount of clients that we say, oh, could you just go and get 50 guys and 50 girls for this? Can we want to understand the difference? Can you segment the market through, AB1 consumers and CDE consumers? Well, no, because I don't know who they are unless they say who they are. And they might say something, but they might be someone different. The other question is ethics. Obviously, we know about the FSA. When does extracting value from a crowd become an ethical issue? When does it go too far? I think people generally don't realize, for instance, that Twitter is completely public. So as an agency that does this, where do we draw the line? To give you an example, we kind of work with two rules. The first rule is basically be the parent of the person. So don't give their name away. We may know who the people are, but don't say to a company or to an organization, this particular person said this really interesting thing, because they may not want you to do that. I think getting value out of the metadata overall is allowable and very, very powerful. I think getting data from individual people within that data set is less so. And the second thing, I think, is the word trade-off. So if you're going to be extracting data, then you should do it for something that creates more value. Just as in an active crowd, if the crowd feels that they're just being used, they're going to stop working with you. You should take that mindset with a passive crowd as well. Now that said, huge value to be made about it. And where does passive crowdsourcing fit versus active crowdsourcing? Well, for me, I think the word is starting point. Who here runs or has run or has facilitated a community or a crowd in some capacity? Keep your hands up if at one point you have had problems keeping them engaged, getting them engaged, or growing that community. I think everyone's hand who was there stayed up. It's really very difficult. If you are able to tap into those people that can be in your community and understand what excites them, what incentivizes them, what insights they're talking about, what trends they're talking about, you then take that and you then put that into your active crowdsource. And it's a much, much shorter time span. You've cut out the trial and error massively. Also, if you're running a campaign, let's say you're running a marketing campaign, and you want to understand how it's going, listening into how it's going from people, talking with each other, obviously allows you to tweak in real time what's going on. So it's a very significant complement to a normal and active crowdsourcing campaign. So my penultimate slide is to say this. I think we're at the start of something. I think we're at the start of something with crowdsourcing. Today has proven how just exciting, how amazing, how, I mean, Jeremiah's presentation this morning was just mind-blowing for me. The same is with passive crowdsourcing. The floodgates, I think, are just starting to open. I think the reason is because, let's take the word big data. Big data is a fashionable term and has been for a couple of years. But big data is useless without big understanding. And passive crowdsourcing, understanding that unstructured data, code framing the discourse analysis that comes out there allows for that big understanding. I want to leave you with another reason why I think it's so exciting. I want to talk about Larry Page's vocal cords. Did anyone see the Larry Page interview on TED just recently? I'm hoping hands stay down and then I can steal this story. Fantastic. So Larry Page has a problem with his vocal cords, basically. They've stopped working. And because he owns Google, he wants to understand if he's the only person that's had this problem or how he can find quicker solutions to it. Why passive crowdsourcing is so interesting from his point of view is imagine if you could take the medical records globally, make them anonymous, and then be able to tap into that data so that you can find out what individual doctors are doing around the world to solve similar problems to his or any other medical problem that exists. And with that, thank you very much. I'll leave you there.